briefly.
Good morning. This is Patrick Robbins. For those joining us remotely, virtually, if you could turn off your cameras, and when your item on the agenda comes forward, and then you can turn your cameras on. But if you wouldn't mind turning your cameras off and mute yourself at home. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Morrison. I'm the Electoral Area Director for Cowichan Lake South Scotts Falls, and will be chairing the regular committee of the whole meeting for Wednesday, July 26th. Before we get underway, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that the Cowichan Valley Regional District is within the unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subasat, Halalt, Penalakat, Stiminis, Layaxan, Pakwachan, Ditidat, and Pachidat nations. Before we get underway, I'd just like to welcome alternate directors Ishtash and Findlay, and note that we are 15 at this committee meeting today, not 16. I think we have a director, Staples, is joining us remotely. Like to remind everyone, we have a fair bit on this agenda. I'd like to ask everyone to try and keep things tight and on point. I'm going to remind everyone that we'll have good meetings if we all commit to running good meetings and to participating in a respectful and collaborative way. I'm going to remind everyone, at least this is what I was taught, that each of us around this table, when we are given the floor to speak, that we generally should be trying to stick to the notion of a question, a clarification, and a comment. If someone has a list of questions that they want to pose, there's a good chance someone else around the table may have that same question and may want to pose it. So looking for everyone's cooperation and collaboration. And I don't see one of our regulars in the audience today, but I was also going to mention during the public input period that if someone or even one of us around the table notes an agenda item has a tenuous link to something else that may be of a concern or issue in their community, I'd like to remind you that we don't want to really go down rabbit holes and explore tenuous links. We want to try and stay to the information in the motion or the report that's before us. So with that, Ms. Boyd, what are we going to do next?
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, I'll call the meeting to order.
Approval of the agenda.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Boyd, next item.
Adoption of the minutes, Committee of the Whole Meeting of July 12, 2023, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole Meeting of July 12, 2023 be adopted.
Moved, seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item.
Thank you. On business arising from minutes, we have none, and we move into public input period.
And I don't see anyone in the gallery. Ms. Boyd, do we have anyone online? Or Mr. Robbins, no one online? Then next item.
Thank you, Chair. We have a delegation from BC Transit regarding sizing the fleet. I believe Seth Wright.
So welcome, Seth, and this is wonderful that you're here, and I just want to note that he's appearing under delegations, and we could have possibly maybe sort of had him in under reports. I'm going to ask for a motion in advance to extend the time period an extra 10 minutes to give him time. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. You've got 20 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Chair Morrison, and thank you, board members, for your time this morning. Sorry, there we go. Thank you very much, Chair Morrison, and thank you, board, for your time this morning. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about bus right sizing. We've done a lot of work to put together this presentation as requested by, I believe, Director Wilson at a previous board or committee of the whole meeting. So we've done a lot of work and a lot of collaboration with folks at BC Transit to look at this and identify if this is feasible and what makes sense. And so the presentation today presents that, and hopefully I can add some context and some color to some of the risks and some of the opportunities that are in front of you with this opportunity. So I'm going to walk through what sort of our current fleet context is, high level, present a bit of the provincial picture because it informs the local picture, and then walk through a very quick intro to transit scheduling because it informs how we optimize efficiency and optimize the costs of transit. I'll present a little summary of ridership analysis from our planner who did the technical analysis on what makes sense in terms of changing buses and where we'd start to experience pass-ups. I'll talk about some of the safety, comfort, and accessibility considerations of medium-duty buses, which are our larger buses that we operate in the local service here, versus the light-duty buses, which are the smaller buses, RBOX, commonly referred to as handy-dart buses, but they service areas like Ladysmith and U-Boat and Honeymoon Bay already. I'll provide a brief financial comparison. I'll talk about the experience in Comox Valley, where they went through a similar right-sizing exercise about 8 years ago. Talk about timeline if we do pursue this, and mention our fleet electrification or low carbon fleet strategy because that ties into this process and will be significant in the coming years. And then I have a recommendation for you today. When we look at BC Transit across the province, we have nearly 1,200 buses of a variety of types. We have 75 high capacity or double decker buses in the Victoria Regional Transit System. We have nearly 550 heavy-duty buses across the province. Mostly these are located in our bigger systems. In our smaller communities, we tend to have medium-duty and light-duty buses because the ridership doesn't necessitate them. So we have nearly 200 medium-duty buses and 338 light-duty buses. In terms of medium-duty buses, I would note that BC Transit's fairly unique in being one of the key users of medium-duty buses. Medium-duty buses are sort of between the light-duty and heavy-duty size, and they provide a unique flexibility and accommodate communities of the sort of similar size of Cowichan and enable higher ridership volumes to be able to take the bus without being the full-size heavy-duty bus that obviously requires a little more maintenance and has some different assets and benefits to it. In terms of where we're at, I would point out a few things. So the heavy-duty bus has a seating capacity of 32 to 43 seats with up to 81 total passengers. If you don't mind smelling your fellow passengers' armpits, I would note. The medium-duty bus has 23 to 31 seats with up to 57 total passengers. And these extra standees are important in terms of crush loading. So rather than having to pass someone up on the side of the highway, or on the side of the road, and them have to wait half an hour, 45 minutes for the next bus, they can get on the bus, and they might have to stand, but at least they're on the bus and getting to their destination. Whereas light-duty buses, they don't have standees permitted, and the new light-duty buses that we're going to, they will have seat belts, and they're going to have a reduced seating capacity because the seat belts actually weigh more. And so they reduce the seating capacity down to 18 from 20 or 22 or even 24 historically. So this is my scheduling 101, and I've taken a few day course in scheduling, so I do have a very, very minor background in scheduling, but bear with me. This I think it's a Hastas chart, but it looks like an Excel chart to me, but Hastas is the scheduling software, and it shows that if you were to run each bus on one route, you'd have a very inefficient system with lots of gaps, and the drivers would be taking frequent unpaid or paid coffee breaks, and that would not be very efficient for operation of the system, considering that labor is one of the expensive costs of operating transit. At the bottom, you see a summary that it would take 6 buses and cost 81 hours and 26 minutes with a 36% recovery, so 36% sort of unvaluable, unused time. And 15% recovery is our goal. So if we interline those same buses with that same frequency, we can reduce it from 6 buses to 4 buses, and it only costs 55 hours and 40 minutes. So that's pretty significant savings in terms of hours and buses. So that's why we interline, and that's why we do that. When we look at the Cowichan Valley, this is the blocking. So our scheduling team puts together the scheduling based on the frequency that the planners work out, and this is what the blocking looks like in each of these different colors, and different numbers are represented for routes in the Cowichan Valley local transit system. So then I'm going to shift gears to the ridership analysis that our planning team did. And to look at this, we evaluated the average max load. So that's at any point in a single route, the maximum number of people on a bus. So people might get on a bus and then get off, and then other people might get on a bus and get off. But we're looking at the point when the bus is most full during that route. And in particular, we look at the point that the block of routes is most full. So that's any one of these rows in this chart is a block. And so in looking at the maximum load, we want to look at the max load plus twice the standard deviation, which I'm not a statistician, so I'm not going to try to defend why we look at that. But that is the analysis that the planners used to ensure that we're fairly confident that we're not going to run into pass-up issues in the next year or two as ridership hopefully grows. And then all trips in a block, as I've identified, need to support a reduced bus capacity so that we don't get those pass-ups on one trip in that particular block. So when we carried out this analysis, we identified that roughly over a third are at high risk of pass-ups of those blocks. 1/3 are at medium risk, high risk of pass-ups if mobility devices are present. So the 18 seat capacity reduces to 12 if there's 2 mobility devices on the bus. So that could be a wheelchair or a stroller. And if 2 wheelchairs or 2 strollers or a wheelchair and a stroller on the bus, the seating capacity is only 12 plus those 2 users that are assuming they're in their device. So that really reduces the sort of capacity of the bus and places a big impact, and we don't want to see pass-ups on these routes. So there's about 27% of blocks right now that could be carried out without having impact. So fairly consistently, basically, that whole block of work doesn't see any more than 12 people on the bus during the day. And that leaves 6 blocks, and as you might remember from that blocking graphic, a block is not an entire day, but sometimes one bus will do several blocks during a day, and often the blocks are chained. But there's 6 blocks with lower risk of pass-ups. And it's noted that routes 8 and 9, which are currently being examined and explored, and right now there's public consultation going on in the South Cowichan Local Area Transit Plan, and that engagement might present some ideas on how we reallocate some of that service to provide better service to those folks. And finally, obviously, there's a risk, and we want to avoid that risk of leaving people stranded on the side of the road. So in thinking about the safety, comfort, and accessibility of our different bus types, I've already mentioned sort of the 12-person seating capacity. But often we hear from our drivers and from our passengers that the light-duty buses are just not as comfortable. There's not as much space. Sometimes your knees are right up against the seat in front of you and that sort of thing. Additionally, because of the placement, the design of the vehicles and ICBC regulation for the number of lumens that must pass onto the road and be transmitted, bike racks are not permitted after dark or after dusk on light-duty buses. This is not an issue on our medium or heavy-duty buses, but for folks that want to take their bike home after dark, which is often the case if you get somewhere on your bike and you want to take the bus home, you can't do that. On medium-duty buses, it's much more similar to an urban heavy-duty bus. It's a low floor, it's super accessible. The seats fold up, so it does reduce capacity when there's mobility devices, but it doesn't impact the seating capacity to the same extent as it does on a light-duty bus. The rear door access reduces dwell time, so because there's a rear door, it enables people to get off at the same time as people are getting on, and it makes it a little bit faster for loading and unloading. And standees obviously allow for greater flexibility of capacity during those peak busier times. In looking at greenhouse gas emissions, we can see that heavy-duty buses, medium-duty buses, obviously produce more greenhouse gas emissions per year than light-duty buses. And looking at costs, I've provided standardized lease fees, which is our approach to allocating costs for vehicles. And the standardized lease fee, monthly standardized lease fee for buses is just under $4,500 for medium duty and just under $3,200 for light duty. On an annual basis to the CVRD, this works out to $25,000 of potential savings if you were to pursue right-sizing 3 medium-duty vehicles to 3 light-duty vehicles, which is one of my options for recommendations. In terms of the Comox Valley experience, this work was done back in 2013 to 2015 and then implemented shortly thereafter, and ultimately it's been reversed since then. They found that the cost savings were minimal. It's sort of subjective whether you consider $25,000 minimal, but that's sort of what we would be looking at here. There were bus capacity issues, especially with passengers with strollers and wheelchairs. Pass-ups increased. There was an inability to carry bikes after dark, as I mentioned, which all of these things contributed to customer complaints. Additionally, it created a more challenging environment for a scheduling team, which had to segregate blocks by vehicle type to ensure that higher capacity trips weren't planned for lower capacity vehicles. And they've ultimately returned to a medium duty fleet. If we are to approach this, we could do this right sizing, but it would happen in the 2024 fiscal year, and it would most likely happen around September 2024 when we're carrying out our expansion, or we have a sort of graceful opportunity to make that change because it would align with a schedule service change, because all of this would need to be rescheduled and reblocked, and so we'd want to do that when we're already doing that 6 months of work anyway. Our low carbon fleet program, which we're extremely excited about, and I hope you'll be hearing announcements in the coming weeks. I know I continue to promise this, but it sounds like there's movement on that. So in terms of our fleet electrification program, we have significant reductions that we've committed to under the province's Clean BC program. And we've committed to a transition to a totally electric fleet by the year 2040. There's lots of reasons for electrification. I'm not sure I need to go through them, but I might identify that in the next year or two, we'll be seeing the introduction of a lot of battery electric buses across the province in BC. And then subsequently in phase 2, we'll have to do a lot of difficult work to move buses around to make it work. So with the low carbon fleet program, we've added not just diesel buses and gasoline buses to our fleet, but we have CNG buses in many systems, and now we have electric buses. These different fleet types obviously require specific infrastructure in the yards to support those vehicle types. And to carry out that work, we need to move buses around to make the most sense. So we're buying electric buses for our expansion buses, but we won't be able to put electric expansion buses in Cowichan because we don't have the infrastructure yet. So we'll have to move them to systems that have the infrastructure and then swap out buses to the systems that are getting the expansion. So there's a bit of moving things around to make it work. Ultimately, the recommendation is to realign up to 3 medium-duty buses with light-duty buses in 24 and 25, and I've provided an alternate expand option, which is just to retain the existing fleet as is, but to select light-duty buses for conventional transit expansion going forward to do that, and that would require reblocking to ensure that we're putting those light-duty vehicles on the lowest ridership routes. Both of these options provide benefit to BC Transit because BC Transit is a position where we don't currently have a medium-duty procurement strategy, or contract, I should say. Because medium-duty vehicles are only available in CNG and diesel, we made a choice to wait until the market might have battery electric medium-duty vehicles. So right now, any medium-duty vehicles acquired through expansion need to be provided from another system. Right now, there's much more demand than availability of medium-duty buses. So if we switch our expansion to light-duty buses, that means that Cowichan's more likely to get those light-duty buses. This achieves the right sizing goal and enables us to have smaller buses in some of the smaller communities where ridership is low. But the option 1 is effectively more ambitious in terms of right sizing, and option 2 provides some of that value, but is a little more conservative and provides greater confidence that you're going to continue to see capacity on the buses and not have pass-ups. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and I've got a speakers list started, but I just want to have a little clarification of something, because I've heard this discussion and information presented previously, not in quite the same form, but in your earlier slides in regards to the efficiency of the system with the reduction of buses from 6 to 4, I think it was. I think a key point in that was there may be a reduction in buses, but increased variety in the type of asset on the road. And because I'm just posing it because the question that we're here to ask you today is, on behalf of our residents, why are these big buses running around our communities with nobody on them? Why can't they be smaller buses? And I think in some of what you've presented there, that's the exact answer to the question. So I just wanted that clarification. Reduced number, but different variety provides the efficiency that you spoke about. But you could have a larger, a medium-duty bus running through a community with fewer people on it because of the connections and the service that it may have to roll into as far as its next blocks. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. That's indeed the conversation we've been having with staff, and sort of the impetus for this presentation is part of it was less about the recommendation, but more about explaining sort of the nature of these dynamics to the board today, so that you can grasp the concept of efficiency in terms of sort of these planning and scheduling trade-offs and the cost trade-offs of having bigger buses operate on these lower ridership routes through the communities. I would say that Lake Ladysmith is slightly separate, and right now they're operating on light duty buses, but those buses are able to operate on those sort of services and be blocked efficiently because they're serving one area. Same with Honeymoon Bay and Yubo. It's a couple buses that provide that service, and then all the buses around Duncan, which are the bigger medium duty buses, are interlined with all the Duncan and South Cowichan routes.
Perfect, thank you. I've got on the speakers list directors Stone, Wilson, Douglas, anyone else?
Thanks. So I appreciate the options, but to me, the presentation and the analysis sort of points to hanging tight a little bit especially until we look at the South Cowichan planning and the efficiencies of Route 8 and 9. Would that be an unfair conclusion?
Through the chair, respectfully, I don't think that's an unfair conclusion. That's a fine conclusion. I would say more to the Cowichan Valley's benefit is probably the second option. BC Transit sees value in the first option because it provides us strategic flexibility in terms of medium duty availability, but it does present a risk to your communities and pass-ups.
And then just as a follow-up, is there any analysis on the GHG savings with the change? I see the dollars was, again, $25,000 is not nothing, but minimal in context of the overall budgeting. What about GHG savings?
Yeah, so I had a slide in my presentation right before the financial slide, which had the buses. That was annual emissions per bus. So it was a reduction of about a third of the emissions.
On those three.
Yeah, for each
routes.
bus. Yeah.
And I just, as a comment, it seems like, because when we built the transit facility here, there was talk about CNG. Do you see maybe just skipping CNG and going to electric charging infrastructure there rather than investing in CNG as an intro?
Yeah, and through the chair again, I have this conversation on a regular basis with our low carbon fleet deployment team and our battery electric bus team, and ask this question about whether Cowichan might leapfrog CNG or whether we'd pursue CNG. And that's sort of a question still to be answered depending on our fleet deployment strategy, which continues to be developed by a team of engineers that are looking at the sort of infrastructure requirements. And I would just emphasize that where a heavy duty bus, I'll use as a simple analogy, is a $1 million asset. The electric charging infrastructure is often a $1 million asset on the ground that takes a couple of years to install and requires conversations with hydro. So the level of infrastructure change required for electrification is a lot of work, and that's the work we're carrying out right now.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and mindful of sticking short and sweet to questions in this, that, and the other. Good presentation, and thank you for that. I do appreciate it. I understand that there is a complex scheduling task here because we have the mixture of high populations such as Mill Bay, Cobble Hill concentrations, then the rural areas as well. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this. Could you, with the Comox realignment that you talked about, how was the choice of routes chosen? For instance, you could have chosen one of many routes. Why did they choose that particular route to try out the realignment?
Yeah, through the chair, I might just seek, are you asking about the specific routes within the Comox Valley, or are you asking about why Comox Valley was selected?
Yeah, and how did they actually, for instance, they would have maybe 10, 15 routes. Why did they choose that particular one? And it's probably a question you don't know the answer to, but it would be interesting to find out why they chose that particular route for a realignment assessment.
Sure. So happy to answer, and through the chair. I was able to go back in time and find the presentation that was presented to the Comox Valley Regional District Board. I shan't say the acronym because it would be too confusing. But that ultimately was similar to here requested as a request of the board to look at optimization and efficiency and reducing the bus size that was serving the rural areas and communities. So that work was carried out, and as part of that work, a similar analysis was carried out on what routes made the most sense and never had ridership above that certain light-duty vehicle threshold for capacity, and identified what routes those were, and then the scheduling was done accordingly, and they were put on those lower capacity routes, and that was done and carried out for a couple of years, and over that time, the customer complaints increased, and this was presented to the board subsequently, and the board said, let's revert to medium duty oriented fleet.
Yeah, it's a tough job you got there. And follow up, please, Mr. Chair. You mentioned about the bike racks after dark. What was the reason that you couldn't carry that again?
So the headlights of the bus are obscured and fragmented by the bikes on the racks. They clear the racks themselves, but the bikes obscure the headlights. And so not enough light is transmitted through them, and this is a sort of headlight placement on the bus issue. We've looked at different options, and short of having the bus manufacturer completely redesigned the front end of the bus, which is not feasible because they make thousands of buses across North America, and we're perhaps a big procurer, but not the only one. That we haven't been able to find another solution around this issue.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Director Douglas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Wright, a couple questions. One is with regards to the analysis on the blocks of trips at a high risk for a pass-up. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on the criteria for determining, which blocks are at the high risk, medium, or low risk. Like how many, say, pass-ups would that be in a given day or a given week?
It's always difficult to discern pass-ups for a variety of reasons, and I would say one of the things that when pass-ups are reported, we always have difficulty discerning is a bus driver can pass by a stop and change their message on the front of the bus to bus full from displaying their route number, and then they'll type in or keep a note that they passed up 6 people at that bus stop. The difficulty is we don't know if those 6 people were waiting for that particular bus or they were waiting for a different route that serves that same stop. So pass-ups is an imperfect science at the best of times. But then looking at pass-ups and looking at what our current blocking and scheduling is, the 3 categories. The one category was basically 12 people can be accommodated as the max load plus twice the standard deviation, which is, so if there's like less than 12 people ever on the bus, or less than probably 8 people ever on the bus on that particular block of work, then it was in the green category. If there were occasionally 12 to 18 people on the bus, it was in the yellow category, and it would be in the red category if there were occasionally over 18 people. So that would be how we would measure pass-ups. But in terms of the exact numbers of how many people would be passed up, it would be variable, and it's always changes from day to day, depending on where people are going and sort of what events are going on in the community.
Great. Thanks for that. The other question was with regards to the challenges they ran into with Comox Valley. Do you have a sense of what the risk would be that we'd see similar challenges here in terms of following through with the recommendation to switch to the light duty with expansion?
Certainly, and through the chair, I might say that I wasn't part of the original analysis in the Comox Valley, so I can't speak to that analysis, but I did look at that analysis. Their assumptions were slightly less conservative than the assumptions we made in carrying out this analysis. So they looked at the maximum load. They didn't add the standard, twice the standard deviation, which we did. And then additionally, we reduced the capacity and took a more conservative stance based on the light duty buses that are currently being manufactured. And so we took a doubly conservative approach, and our recommendation is the 3 buses is perhaps the less conservative of the 2 approaches, but is still more conservative than the original Comox Valley assessment.
Great, thank you.
Alternate Director Ishdas.
Thank you, Chair. My question I was hoping was going to be asked in the prior there, and I thought Director Douglas was going to get it, but he got close. My question is on the pass-bys. Where are you getting your data for future considerations? The reason I bring that up is I look at the amount of building happening in Ladysmith, downtown Duncan, as we see right at the front door, and then our last week's meeting, just for our North Cowichan's Bell McKinnon corridor, we're forecasting 3,000 people within the next 5 to 6 years just at Bell McKinnon. So my curiosity is you're making a decision now to downsize. In that downsizing on pass-bys, is there future growth consideration, and does BC Transit regularly reach out to the planning departments in each of the municipalities as well, where there tends to be larger growth outside of the Mill Bay, Cobble Hill, Shawnigan districts? So I'm just curious, to make it short, future growth data considered in pass-bys so that next year we downsize them, and then as soon as we do the downsize, we're like, oh goodness, we did consider the exploding growth in the Cowichan Valley, we need to upsize now.
Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. And I've had a number of conversations with the BC Transit planner, my colleague for the Cowichan Valley, and in particular about the significant amount of growth that's forecasted, in particular for Bell McKinnon, because there's new hospital as well, and we've had some conversations with the folks from VIHA about that. The expansion proposal and looking at continuing to grow the system and add service hours to the system doesn't necessarily conflict with the right sizing. And the new expansion vehicles, while they would be light duty under both of the recommendations proposed here, they wouldn't necessarily have to be aligned to those expansion hours. So we would be likely to reschedule them and ensure that we put those smaller buses on the routes that have the lowest capacity throughout the day. And the expansion, even if it's a new route and even if we expect ridership to be a little sluggish at first, we might put medium duty buses just so we don't have pass-ups on those routes, but we would base that on analysis. You asked a prior question about sort of how do we project in the future, and I would say that there is certainly ongoing conversations through CVRD staff, and there's a transit planner here at the CVRD, Rochelle Rondo, that supports those conversations with the respective municipalities, but we do have conversations around future growth trajectories, and as part of any planning exercise that we carry out, such as the South Cowichan Local Area Transit Plan, but also the Transit Future Action Plan before that was completed about a year ago now. That analysis looked at current census data, and then there's conversations about where future density is expected, and there's certainly due consideration for that, but our plans are ultimately only for 5 years, so it's more focused on trends than future projections.
Thanks, that's pretty full and well-rounded, and understood everything you said, except that it sounds to me like your statistical scientists do a lot of work over there, and the question from our alternate director about future gazing is probably a tough one for them, because there's so many variables. And just a note for our municipal partners here, I think that on virtually every application that comes out through the electoral area planning department, there's always referrals to the BC Transit folks, and that I think they're pretty close contact and have a pretty good idea where future growth in the more rural areas is. So I don't see any further hands. Are you sticking around for our additional reports that are coming up next?
I will sit around and see her.
Oh, fantastic. We got the A-team here. Oh, Director Nicholson to close this.
I just want to come back to that bike rack issue with the, do other areas have the same rules about not being able to use the bike racks after dusk? Or is there a way that I just can't imagine why we can't solve that problem, because that seems to me a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And through the chair, this has been a perennial theme. This is the regulation across the province, BC, and we've had the conversation with ICBC, and it's ultimately they calculate the lumens. And I know some folks are cyclists, and if you buy a bike light, it's measured in lumens. So that's sort of the volume of light that's able to transmit forward. And this is a question of lumens transmitting through the bikes. And increasingly with mountain bikes having bigger tires, it's even more of a challenge. But on those light duty buses, it's been something that our fleet department and our fleet engineers and our folks that, fleet engineers who have these conversations also with the manufacturers of the buses have discussed and looked at alternate bike racks. We recently have done some work, and the newer bike racks will be able to accommodate 3-inch tires. And when we get a new bus brought into the system, the new bus has those better bike racks that can accommodate those wider tires. But the issue of light duty buses not being able to accommodate bikes after dark is not something we've been able to address. Many of our bigger systems that have lower ridership routes, so I think about Kamloops, there's 2 or 3 routes that are serviced by light duty buses because they're sort of serve the hinterlands of the city. And in that system, we flag the particular trips that are served by a light duty bus with a letter code that's B or community bus, and that indicates that that particular bus won't be able to carry your bike after dark. And so this is sort of a common thread that we hear and something we haven't been able to address to date.
Seeing no other hands, a little applause for the great presentation today. That's wonderful. And I was just, before you leave, I was just thinking about, and it's not our job to propose the solutions, but I was just thinking about when tow trucks have a vehicle towing in behind and they put the magnetic lights on it, but I'm pretty sure ICBC wouldn't go for that. So anyways, thank you for that. And with that, I'll go to Ms. Boyd for our next item on the agenda.
Great, thank you, Chair. There's no correspondence or information. We move to 8 reports. R1, report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding the Cowichan Valley commuter and local transit services changes for information.
Welcome, Mr. Wakeham.
Hello, Chair and Directors. Thank you to Seth for that presentation. Yeah, we've been working on it with these folks for quite a number of years. We've been wanting to get the best explanation because directors have continued to ask the questions, and I think it was a really good overview of the challenges they face. With regard to R1, which is the commuter and local transit service changes, I just want to give you an update here of some changes that are going to take place on September the 3rd. Most of the changes are what we call minor housekeeping items that include sort of route name changes. And a lot of this came from the acronym of the NCX, the Nanaimo Cowichan Expressway, and our commuter routes that we go to Victoria had different names. So we've remodeled them, and there'll be a change to Route 44, which is the Saturday Victoria service, and Route 66, that'll be known as the CVX 66, and we'll also make a slight change to the Route 99, which will be referred to as the Shawnigan Lake SV Shawnigan Victoria Express. So just minor changes. It just makes it easier for our customers when they call in and they try to follow our rider's guide, because we really have 3 different routes. Route 44 is the Saturday service that goes to Victoria. 66 and 99 go Monday to Friday. So we think that'll make it easier for the riders to understand. Also, we're going to make a cost-neutral change to Route 66. We've been dealing with this for quite a few years. We get quite a few inquiries by the public. Why don't we run service during the day and also in the evenings? And so this was an opportunity for us to take a look at, in light of quite a few residents that have chosen not to work in Victoria anymore, at least by taking our bus. Maybe they're doing it through work-from-home agreements, but the ridership is reduced. And so we took a look at the routes that had the least amount of riders. And we chose the second earliest, which is 5:55 a.m., which is a southbound trip to Victoria, and the 9:23, and also to move up the second latest northbound return trip from 4:45 to 1:45. So it gives a trip time in the day. People can still leave early in the morning if they want, and they can choose to come back in the afternoon, or they can go down later in the morning, let's say at 9:30, and come back at 4 or 5 if they want. And we chose those times because these are the least amount of people that are impacted. And we really, we've been getting these inquiries for a long time, and I guess in a perfect world, we wish we had more hours and provincial funding, and we would run more trips during the day and evenings. So that's just something we'll consider in the future yet. And then lastly, there's just a number of local service trips. So these are the local ones that are, the times are being adjusted. There was an analysis done by BC Transit recently, and they realized the on-time performance was needing adjustment. And so this really removes the slack, if you will, at some of our stops. So the bus times will make it less waiting for the passengers at the stops. So that's a bit of a quick overview of it. Does anybody have any questions that I can
Director Stone?
attempt to answer?
When you look at the second earliest trip, is there a capacity on that earliest trip to absorb that second earliest trip's numbers?
Yes, Director Stone, we took a look at there's 4 trips, and we tried to figure out which one. So right now we have the 5:34, the 5:55, that's one we're discontinuing. The next one is 6:15. So yes, there's capacity. The 5:55 had the lowest ridership of about 7 over the last couple months, so it's quite low. Same thing on the return. We discontinued the 4:45, so people still have the choice of 5:15 or 4:10, and again, that was the lowest at 8.
Thank you. And then just a quick question. I love the 6699s. Why can't we rename the NCX the 77?
I'll poise that one to BCT if they want to, but I'm not sure how we came up with that number 70. But I think there is, to some degree, there might even be a conflict with the RDN scheduling. You try to stay away, they might have had a 77. But Seth, maybe do you know off the top of your head how we chose the number?
It was just.
I know, it's a bit of a joke. It's kind of, I'm not sure.
I just thought it'd be cool if all our interregional were,
Yeah, of course. For the interregional services, we've had conversation, and we've had conversation about going to a 3-digit numbering system, because ultimately that won't conflict with local service, but in identifying numbers for the 66, 44, and 99, and the 70, ultimately those were numbers that were decided because they were sufficiently separated from the local routes, which tend to be in the lower 2 digits, but we continue to have those conversations about what makes the most sense, and we work with our marketing department and our planning and scheduling department to have informed conversations around those things.
So just looking around the room, not any other hands, this is an information item.
Yes, correct.
So when are we going to be asked to authorize or approve at the board, or what's the next steps?
You actually already did. We brought this up
Okay.
back in the spring, saying we were going to reallocate, and that was a
Okay.
direction then. This is just for your information, letting you know that in their new rider's guide coming out, there's going to be some changes. That's why. That's why I brought it forth.
Thank you. Ms. Boyd, next item.
Thank you, Chair. R2, report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding Nanaimo to Cowichan Express and CX Transit Service 1-year review. A presentation, I believe we have the person online.
Correct, and I just thought, if I may, Mr. Chair, just to give a bit of an overview, and another BC Transit representative will be doing the presentation. So there's a lot of information in your package here. There was 59 pages, rather lengthy. That was attachment A. That's the full report. The gentleman's name is Bronson Bullivant. We've been working with him and Seth for quite a while on the 1-year review of the NCX, and he's going to present remotely here just in a minute on a shorter version. The staff report provides really a summary of the various items which we included from the recent findings when BCT finalized a 1-year review of the service. And so the topics commented just in the report are ridership, which we think is doing well. It will continue to improve as the expectation, as well as when we continue to market it. Priorities on the service improvement, it's not surprising that the feedback we got, riders want more frequency, they want Sunday service. The good news to me is that the operations, the running of the buses and the routes, there's no operational issue, so that's really good. Bus stop activity, there's some mentions, there's the stops mentioned in the report of the more well-used stops, Nanaimo downtown, Ladysmith, and I think it's the Village Green Mall are the top 3. And then there's 2 hot topics, a possible future Chemaina stop and potentially adjusting the pickup and drop-off policy at Cowichan stops. Both of which these are challenging topics, and I'm going to leave that for BC Transit to go through in their presentation because they've got quite a reasoning on where we landed on both of those. And then just financially here, the operating expenses were a little bit over budget on our projection, and unfortunately the bigger surprise was the revenues were down a fair amount, a little over $50,000 for the CVRD share. And I think the report speaks to, there's a number of reasons causing that, and I think one of them is, being a new service, it was a bit of an optimistic estimate of what the revenues were going to be. I think there's other factors. I know we have less students that are riding our buses, and that could be a reason that either the times don't line up perfectly, or more than likely there's probably a fair cost concern that we're going to review that separately. And I should mention that for many of the directors that got copied on my email last night with regard to the concern that an individual sent in with regard to, a valid concern with regard to the fares. The NCX review does not include a fare review. That is a separate segment that is done by BC Transit. They do it for every region. They'll do it for us, and they'll recommend what they suggest our fares and our products should be. They do the same for our partner, the RDN, and this one's unique because we have to get approval of our partner on whatever we want to do. So again, I'll let Seth and in this case Bronson go through and do their presentation, unless anybody had any questions just on the staff report. All good?
Thank you, Jim. I guess we'll go to our remote presenter. Bronson, are you there? Yeah.
I am, thank you. Just give me one moment. I'm just going to set up my screen here and share it. Okay, does everyone see the homepage?
I think we can.
Lovely. Sorry, I don't typically use WebEx, so just getting everything organized on my screens. Okay, thanks Jim for the brief introduction. A little bit more about me. I've been working with BC Transit for the past 5 years, and within the RDN supporting planning projects there for the past 2. This is my first time presenting this to the CVRD, so I'm excited to be here. I also recognize that we've been talking a lot about trans over the past 50 minutes or so I'll do my best to scoot through this presentation and open it up to any questions afterwards. So today I will be summarizing the post-implementation review. As Jim mentioned, it is a relatively dense document, so I'll be focusing on the main themes and outcomes of the review. I will begin with an overview of the introduction of the service and then speak to the public engagement results. I will then speak to the main 4 chapters of the review, including ridership and route analysis, schedule design, followed by a couple miscellaneous items, and I'll finish the presentation with a brief summary and discuss next steps. So the purpose of this document was to provide an in-depth review of service operation, to evaluate the service as a whole, and to identify areas to improve. We also wanted to solicit public feedback to ensure that the service was working for everyone. There was a lot of work that had gone into developing this service. Beginning in 2015, which was before my time with BC Transit, we completed a market research report, which was done by SNC Lavalin, looking to determine where service demand came from for various corridors on the island. BC Transit also completed a service discussion document in 2021. As a result of the 2020 BC Transit strategic plan, which had a priority to continue to invest in interregional routes in British Columbia. And finally, we developed an implementation plan in February 2022 to provide the CVRD and RDN a roadmap to implement the service from infrastructure to marketing. The service launched as a regional and express service between downtown Nanaimo and the village Green Mall and Duncan on March 28, 2022. So in the 2015 market research study, the initial demand modeling suggested a commuter market up to 300 people per day, consisting of Vancouver Island University students, VIU workers, and Nanaimo hospital workers. This was outlined as a high-end estimate in the report. There was also a captive market identified from Ladysmith heading to Nanaimo, and a smaller market from Nanaimo to VIU, Duncan for students and employees, as well as the Cowichan District Hospital. The 2021 service discussion document summarized the demand outlined from the market research study and made recommendations for the stop locations. During the public engagement for the 2021 report, it was evident that there was more demand for discretionary trips rather than just commuter trips. The combination of both the 2015 and 2021 report led to the recommendation for additional stops between the Cowichan Valley Regional District and the RDN. Sorry, could I just, I'm getting feedback from one of the mics that might be the IT support co-host. Could that be muted possibly? Sorry about that.
We'll check into it.
Okay, thank you. I'll keep going. In terms of existing service, just a quick overview. On the right, we have this newly developed map outlining all the stop locations as well as the bounds of the service within the RDN and the CVRD. Currently, we have 8 stops in each direction, located in downtown Nanaimo, South Park Plaza, the airport, Ladysmith, Cowichan Commons, and Village Green Mall. There are also a couple of more stops along Canada Avenue and Beverly Street. A new stop was installed at both Cowichan Commons and in Ladysmith near the Tim Hortons. There are 7 round trips on the week during the week and 6 round trips on Saturdays with no service right now on Sundays. The stopping policy in the CVRD only allows pickups and drop-offs depending on direction, whereas Nanaimo allows on and offs in both direction. And it also included a quick overview of the fares with the monthly Zone D covering both the CVRD, RDN, local transit, as well as the NCX, with the monthly Zone C only covering the NCX, just for information. So for public engagement, we completed public engagement after the full year of service. So it took place from April 3rd to April 17th, 2023. We ended up with 232 full survey completions with a majority of respondents from Duncan and Nanaimo. We split up riders into 3 main cohorts, frequent riders, non-frequent riders, and respondents who have not used the NCX. This enabled us to understand the needs of existing riders, as well as understanding the potential latent demand of non-riders right now. Here, within the report, we see why respondents used the NCX. A key finding was that although the market demand was initially believed to be university students primarily, a larger subset was commuters, followed by university and leisure. The largest market for non-frequent riders and non-riders was leisure. This information will help us to ensure that we continue to invest in key commuter times, but also provide midday service to allow for those shopping and leisure trips. A very useful result of the public engagement was our ranked service improvement question. We asked all respondents what priorities were most important to them and ranked them 1 to 11. We also organized the results geographically to ensure that we could make improvements based on the location as the service covers so much area. The top 3 priorities were all scheduling related. They were improving operating hours during the week, improving connections to Victoria, and adding Sunday service. We'll be revisiting these priorities as I go through each of the separate chapters. First chapter is ridership and route analysis. This is a pretty interesting graph. The review highlighted the productivity of interregional transit routes in British Columbia. Just really briefly, when we speak about ridership productivity, we are speaking about boardings per revenue hour or rides per hour, as shown on the x-axis in this graph. Rides per hour is a vital metric in public transit, representing the average number of average number of passenger boardings a transit vehicle takes per hour of revenue service. It also allows an apples-to-apples comparison between services, which we can see here. The NCX, after the first year, sat at 5.4 rides per hour. Just really quickly, it should be noted that over the course of each of these systems' lifespans, there has been minimal expansion hours added year over year. More can be seen detailed in the report, but on average, it's about 5% per year. Looking at specific trends, we have 2 graphs here. The one on the top right highlights productivity using both calculated rides per hour and the APC, or automatic passenger counter, rides per hour. Calculated rides per hour comes from our revenue model, where ridership is measured by how many passes have been sold. The initial peak in April is attributed to the fact that there was a large pre-order of passes to distribute. The second graph drills down a level, comparing monthly productivity by day type, so either during the week or on Saturdays. The main takeaway here is that weekday ridership grew from 48%, from April 2022 to March 2023. Although ridership does fluctuate, it is a promising trend. Another key indicator here is that during a weekday in February 2023, we did hit 6 rides per hour, which is a target threshold for interregional service. It's a number that reflects when enough people take the bus that it offsets the carbon footprint of the bus versus their personal vehicles. We included a small section on ridership forecasting in the report, and I want to highlight it to show where we could expect ridership to go. This uses at the average growth pattern we saw in the previous graph. So right now, we sat at around 32,000 rides for the past year. We could expect it to go up to 80,000 rides. It's all dependent on a lot of different factors, but this is probably the high-end estimate. Another aspect of ridership that the review looked at was where people are going and coming from and getting on and off the bus. With our APC data, we can see where people move. The graph on the right shows the most people board in Alight in Nanaimo, which is consistent with a market study completed in 2015. When we drill down to look at the stop by stop during the week, we can see the main destination and origin is the Nanaimo Exchange, whereas in the CVRD, it is more spread throughout the community, with the main two locations being the Village Green Mall and in Ladysmith. The review summarized that servicing new areas was not outlined as a key priority. When the respondents were asked about whether providing service to Chemainus was a priority, only approximately 35% of respondents indicated that it was, and it sat at 7 out of 11 in terms of what should be prioritized with that service prioritization question. With the subset of the public that wanted stop here, all of BC Transit, the RDN, and the CVRD took this and will investigate the opportunity to build a new stop near either the Trans-Canada Highway and River Road or Mount Sicker Road intersections. We'll be working with MOTI to find a suitable location for when demand warrants the inclusion of the stop. Other new areas that were significant to the public were expanding to areas in Nanaimo and Duncan, as well as connecting to locations in Victoria. Just to summarize the ridership and routing chapter, really the main outcome was that there was no significant routing or service frequency changes. That was based on the review of ridership and the route. BC Transit will take on a routing review within 24 months to ensure that the routing continues to work for riders. We'll also work with MOTI to find a suitable site for a stop near Chemainus, as well as work with the Vancouver Island University Student Union in regard to future interest in the NCX and potential routing and connections to VIU. So getting into the schedule design, a key part of the review was to evaluate service levels. Graph here just kind of shows all of the different interregional services and where they sit from when they operate during the week. Similar to Route 66, the CVX, the NCX operates on weekdays and Saturdays only, whereas routes like the FEX and the Fraser Valley operate 7 days a week. A big piece of why there isn't Sunday service is due to service levels in the CVRD and the RDN, which I'll speak to in just the next slide here. This graphic is included in the report, and it outlines the importance that service levels that bound the interregional service. So all this is explaining is that the generating communities need their local transit trips that feed quote unquote riders to the NCX to have a larger span than the NCX. And in the major center, being Nanaimo, need their local transit trips that both feed and receive riders to have a larger span than the NCX. So this is a big reason why improvements to interregional services have to go hand in hand with the improvements at the local level. The review broke down all of the transfer opportunities where the RDN and CVRD could focus on improving accessibility to the interregional route. It's a lot more dense in the report itself, so I implore you to look at that, but I'll summarize quickly the main takeaways. To improve connections in the CVRD, additional local trips in the morning will improve the ability for residents in the CVRD to access the Route 70. Another key piece of improving transfers in the CVRD would be to improve access to and reach of the NCX by connecting services from Route 2 and Route 4 within Duncan and Route 34 to enable more northbound morning travel. The RDN currently has good access to the 70 with routes 30, 40, and 50 all connecting with trips that enable them to get to VIU, Woodgrove Center, and the hospital, and other opportunities to get them to the ferries if they wait a little bit. But there also could be work done on improving the connections to the ferry schedules within the RDN. This slide's getting kind of into the details a little bit, but at a high level, the pie charts on the right highlight that we have some operational improvements to make with the service. Currently, the NCX route has operators leaving bus stops early. So an outcome of this we will be making operational adjustments and add in a monitoring plan to improve the early departures. From the scheduling review, there were a handful of adjustments and improvements recommended. The review recommended that we have to engage with MOTI on a future traffic management plan for the highway so we can plan for delays that will inevitably happen. Some short-term priorities will be to make adjustments to the CVX to enable riders originating in Nanaimo to easily transfer to it, and we'll also aim to improve weekday and Saturday service levels while looking at Sunday service in the future. So the next section, I'll cover marketing and communication. When the service was launched, we had multiple media platforms engaged, including media advisories, social media posts, website notifications, as well as newspaper articles and posters put up throughout the region. We also had radio advertisements going to launch the service. The majority of feedback that came through specific to marketing and communication was a lack of understanding of various aspects about the NCX. This included fares, the pickup and drop-off policy, as well as how to get to places at the end of the line in both directions. So for recommendations out of this chapter, some of the most actionable items fall into how we can improve our customer-facing documents, including the annotation of specific trips that connect to Victoria-bound transit in the NCX schedule, and in the CVRD schedule, look to annotate specific CVX trips that connect from Nanaimo. We'll also aim to update the map to better clarify where you can connect to at specific stop locations. We will also make sure to look at the fare section in the Rider's Guide and make it more prominent. Finally, BC Transit will look to make information standardized for all interregional routes, which came as an outcome of this review. So just really briefly, I'll cover a couple of subjects that were included at the end of the post-implementation review. So the two recommendations that came out of here, it was a short chapter, so I'm just hopping right to the recommendations, was in regards to the stopping policy and the fare review. First, we hope to investigate the ability to change the stopping policy in the CVRD. Right now, within the bounds of the Cowichan Valley, specific stops will only allow pickup or drop-off based on the direction. Inbound trips can only drop off, whereas outbound trips can only pick up. This was originally done with the intention of making a more express-type service. We asked respondents whether or not this was a priority change, and although it wasn't high on the priority list, both operators and stakeholders believed it would improve rider legibility. So we're currently working with the operating companies to ensure that this is possible in the near term. We also have heard a lot about changing fares and requests for more information about fares. So Jim already kind of mentioned this, but we're looking to take on this process in fall 2023 to determine the best path forward. So just to summarize what I've kind of discussed today, the NCX in general is operating very well for its first year of service. We have over 32,000 rides and it's been a successful project. And we have various adjustments that came out of this review to make sure that ridership increases over future years. This includes improving communication and collaboration with our partners, beginning a route review sometime over the next few years, as well as improving connections locally in the CVRD. Further to this, we do have a plan to have some service hour expansion in 2025-26, which will address some of the improvements outlined in this review. That wraps up my presentation. Appreciate everyone's time.
Well done, Bronson. Thank you for that. That was very informative. And I've got Director Stone and Ishtash. And could you lower your presentation so I can see the rest of my colleagues? Could I ask you to lower your presentation so I can see the rest of my colleagues on the screen? Thank you.
Yep, sorry about that.
Any other directors want on the list to remind everyone this is an information item as well? And look to Director Stone.
Thank you, and I'll keep it brief because I think through Mr. Wakeham, Ms. Rondo, and the board, I distributed what I thought was probably the best and most concise insights on the struggles with that route, especially when it comes to young people attending university and looking for work opportunities. The cost combination of needing Nanaimo and monthly passes for two systems, even for the students, works out to over approximately $250 per month. And if you're not a student, we saw the fare combinations there. It can be over $300-400, which doesn't make it affordable for those most needing transit. And the early returns in the evenings preclude certain courses at VIU from being able to attend and return back. So I agree that the recommendations are thoughtful, but I think the insights in that email were things like what you can do for $2.50 within either system in terms of distance and time versus what you have to pay $7.50 for, basically a sub 20-kilometer trip between Ladysmith and Nanaimo costs more than, all-day riding in Nanaimo. It just doesn't add up in terms of the cost of the service versus the service that's provided relative to either the Cowichan or the Nanaimo systems, the conventional systems. And that, what really frustrates me, and I think that I used this email because I said it was the most concise and thoughtful presentation of feedback I consistently get from people either wanting to explore work opportunities or education opportunities in Nanaimo, is that it's basically non-functional for that. So why aren't we getting VIU students? Because it's not workable for them. It's too expensive and the scheduling doesn't work. And that just means that we're excluding the most key demographics with cost and scheduling. So for me, when I see the bus and I see 6, 10, 12 people on it, that's great. But when you know that with a reduced fare, you can more than perhaps even double that ridership, it starts to feel pretty frustrating. So I really hope that we move forward with that. And I will say, as a unit with BC Transit, this lack of funding for expansion, I think we've struggled 4 years in a row now, is completely disconnected and unacceptable from the provincial virtue signaling that they do around climate action, equity, social development within our regions. And it needs to be publicly stated that it's unacceptable to sort of stand on your high horse of all of these wonderful things that you want to do for people and not provide them the basic necessities that they need, which is the expansion funding for now 4 years in a row. So that's my soapbox. Thank you.
It was a great soapbox speech. Alternate Director Istish.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Stone, for sharing that information. As being an alternate, I wasn't privy to the email. So some of what I may share in here may have been summarized in that. But Director Stone provided the perfect segue to what I was going to share here, and that particular ridership in regards to people working and going to school from Crofton and from Chemainus. I quickly want to highlight on those respondent stats. We managed to get 35% response saying Chemainus is a priority from 4% of respondents that live in Chemainus and Crofton. The combined response from Chemainus and Crofton is 4%, whereas the people that don't live in the area are 70% that responded, and we still managed to get 35% in favor of those Chemainus and Crofton areas. So that's actually pretty good stats resounding that it should be a higher priority. I'm going to use personal experience, and it's anecdotal or it's actual though. I have a business in Chemainus, and I primarily employ high school students, and two of those being both of my kids that went to VIU. 80% of the teenage youth that work for me, and they've been from Crofton to Chemainus, all went to VIU, all in days that they couldn't get family transportation or didn't have their own transportation. They could not get to VIU. Additionally, I have in the last year had 3 employees from Nanaimo that couldn't get to my store to work when they had vehicle problems and there's no transit options. And Director Stone touched on it perfectly, because I did the math. To leave Chemainus, you cannot leave Chemainus to catch that Nanaimo connection till 9:30 in the morning. And you don't reach Nanaimo, which then you still need to do an exchange, until 10:30. Everybody's jobs and schools have started by then. To leave Nanaimo, you need to leave Nanaimo by about 2:30 to get the very last bus from Ladysmith to get to Chemainus. You have to be in Ladysmith by 3:30. School is not done, and work is not done in Nanaimo if you're using it for those regions. So definitely, as Director Stone said, you're precluding a whole amount in there. So saying that we didn't have this usership, it's like, well, how come nobody's swimming? Well, you didn't give them the opportunity to have swimming lessons, so now they're not swimmers, you know? There's my little analogy. It's like you can't use stats that say there isn't any usage when there's no way to even feasibly do it. Now, there is one way that I can get to Nanaimo to get to school on time or get back to Chemainus after work hours, and that's to take a 2.5-hour bus ride. I'd leave Chemainus, take the route that goes through Crofton, continue to the pickups. I get to downtown Duncan so I leave Chemainus at 6:30, I get to Duncan at 7:30, and then I can hop on that express, and that express then gets me to Nanaimo at, what have I got here? 9 o'clock, so 2.5 hours. That's not even reasonable there. So I'm glad to see there's going to be thoughts about being realistic about connections to Chemainus, but I think it's a huge necessity for Chemainus and Crofton, being that probably between those two communities, that's upwards of 7,000 people. So I just wanted to put there, I'm glad that I was the alternate today on this because it's something that I've got straight from my staff, my kids, and all the people I know that have been trying to get to Nanaimo. And then, of course, if anybody else doesn't bring it up, my goodness, we need that Duke Point ferry connection. So I just wanted to share on there, and I understand the issue. So maybe it's good to see, maybe right now Route 34 is the issue that really will help because 9:24 to 3:30, that's your window of time to take Route 34 to Ladysmith to catch the NCX. The other way is to lean on my fellow director, McClinton possibly, and let's get Saltaire on the map so we can actually go through Saltaire and catch even more ridership and get to Ladysmith in a better time frame. So maybe there's some more opportunities for Route 34 there. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Director Stetson. And it's great to hear your comment, and I know that the BC Transit is listening and our staff are listening. We didn't have the ability to launch a full and robust service in the beginning of this, and we almost knew that those were going to be issues right from the outset. So great points, and great that BC Transit can hear it and go back and play the tape if you want as well. So I think that there will be some tweaks coming in the future, and they've already noted in the staff report the areas that they're looking at. And of course, we're all going to be really interested in hearing what they have to say about fares when that comes through.
And I did see them in town, the whole 2 BC Ferries buses, or BC Transit buses full of BC Transit employees in Chemainus trying to figure out the Henry Road roundabout as a quick detour. So I do thank them for that. I actually saw them in town doing the work. So definitely want to thank them for taking it seriously. They were there looking at it.
Yeah, they're great partners and they work well with our staff. So I'll go to Director Stone to close.
Sorry, just by way of, I think I should credit Morgan Tucci that had sent me that email. That was like for a young student who I ran into at a food security event. She's really engaged, she's really intelligent, but she also struggles with the realities of the costs. And I think it was pretty clear in there, but I think she deserved credit for such a compelling case to be made for both scheduling and costs.
Thank you for that, Director Stone. It was a very thoughtful and concise email, and I'm glad that it was brought forward. With that, there's no recommendations here for us to act on as an information item. It is 10:45. I want to thank Seth for your presentation and attendance today, and I think we have sort of a gear shift, so to speak, to ECDEV, so I'd like to recess until 10:55. Well, then, yeah. Can we get everybody back in their seats, please? Welcome back, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for their succinctness. It looks like we're moving along quite nicely here. Remind everyone that the next two items are information items, and we had Mr. O'Riordan, there he is. I wouldn't say you were hiding. Oh! So we've got a couple of reports. We're now to R4 for information. Welcome, Mr. O'Riordan. R3? Oh, look at that, I skipped one. No, R3, welcome, Mr. O'Riordan, and please take her away.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and Directors. So as you see, the purpose of this report today is to provide an update to committee on the Cowichan Workforce Housing Strategy. Our last project update to committee was in April, where we shared the results of the first round of engagement and received feedback from committee to refine the scope of the project, which includes regional workforce housing policy guidelines, accelerated housing solutions, looking at short-term vacation rental regulations, and investigating the opportunity to potentially create a housing authority within the region. So our consultant, Jada Bassi from City Spaces, is here today to present on where we are in the process and to receive committee feedback in advance of preparing the draft workforce housing strategy. So I'll just hand it over to Jada, I believe, who's here online to present to committee. Thank you.
Welcome, Jada. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Barry. I will share my screen. Okay. Well, it's nice to be back with the committee as a whole to provide an update on the workforce housing strategy. So this morning, what I'm going to do is provide an overview of the project, just to remind everyone of why we're undertaking this workforce housing strategy. And then we'll dive into our strategy direction. And again, this is informed by the feedback that all of you have provided to us previously on refining the scope. And we have brought that out to engagement. So our second round of engagement, we soundboarded the strategy direction. So I will summarize what we heard from those events. Then I'll share with you our approach to developing the workforce housing strategy, outline next steps, and answer any questions that you have. So just to remind everybody, we have undertaken recent studies in the Cowichan region that have highlighted the intrinsic relationship between housing and the labor market in the Cowichan region. Two key studies that demonstrated this was a regional housing needs report as well as a workforce housing survey. And some of the key information that was demonstrated in these reports was falling short on delivering new housing units in the region, and this is impacting the labor market. Specifically, we require nearly 1,000 new housing units per year, and we are developing on average 460 new units per year between the private sector and the nonprofit housing sector. So that means we're falling short of approximately 531 units per year. And cumulatively, year after year of falling short, it is creating market pressures, and that's contributing to things such as shortage of rental housing, as well as increases in prices. Also, housing costs are misaligned with regional wages. So as we're seeing rental prices and home ownership prices increase, we're not seeing wages increase at that same rate. So that means many households are more challenged to afford housing that meets their needs. One of the patterns that we're seeing as a result of this is households are relocating to where housing is available rather than where they prefer to be. For example, moving away further from their jobs, and this is contributing to things like commuting issue. We heard lots about transportation today, and it's also increasing the cost of transportation for households. We're also paying attention to the job vacancy rates, which have increased from 3.3 to 5.9%. And we've heard from employers that it is difficult to recruit and retain employees and also to convince new candidates from accepting job offers because of the housing factor, both availability and affordability. And this is contributing to labor shortage in the region, including we're seeing things like closures, reduced hours, and service. But the Cowichan region has also made positive progress on addressing housing need for the workforce. There are already existing policies, plans, and initiatives in motion, including the Cowichan Attainable Housing Strategy that looks at addressing housing from non-market to market, vulnerable and low-income households. It's also apparent through engagement that there's a strong appetite from the development industry to build more units across the region, and they're looking for incentives and also solutions to things like infrastructure and servicing, but there is definitely this desire. And also there's a healthy curiosity from all sectors and the public to explore more solutions. And I'd say that there's an appetite for progressive and bold changes. But there is the need, that magnitude of housing need is being fueled by rapid change, and it is surpassing the collective capacity to respond. And this means, housing development is not keeping up with the pace of our population growth, and there continues to be development constraints that are limiting development activity, such as infrastructure. So all that to say, why we're undertaking a workforce housing strategy is to identify a collaborative and regional solution to workforce housing, to identify potential solutions to attract and retain staff within various industries, and also to foster sustainable economic growth in the region. So we are more than halfway through the process now. So we've done research, we've done 2 rounds of engagement, looking at root causes of workforce housing needs, and also fine-tuning potential solutions and soundboarding that with multi-sector engagement. So we're now at the phase where we're knitting everything together and we're putting pen to paper and drafting the strategy at this point in time. So that's a cumulative input from engagement, research, case studies to date. So once we're finished drafting the strategy, we're going to share that with all the participants who've engaged so far to get them to review that. We'll also give them a survey to respond, to give us some feedback. We'll also have some focus groups to get some more input, and then we'll finalize the strategy and have it ready to launch. The timeline has shifted slightly, so we're expecting that next round of engagement on the draft strategy to occur around the end of August, early September, and finalize the strategy in September. Okay, so next we'll talk about our strategy directions and what we heard when we shared the work in progress. So as Barry mentioned, we have been pursuing 4 overarching strategies. 1, short-term rental regulations, 2, accelerated housing solutions, 3, potentially establishing a housing authority, and 4, industry-specific guidance, which is really geared towards what employers or organizations can do for staff accommodation. So for each one of these strategies, I'm going to go through a little bit of context of what this looks like in a bit more detail than you heard last April, and then also what the feedback we heard from stakeholders. So our short-term rental regulations, those effectively are those private rentals that can be booked online, such as Airbnb. Now, the short-term rentals is really intended to support the local tourism economy by providing accommodation, and also given the fact that there is a shortage of hotel accommodation right now in the Cowichan region, this is playing actually quite a crucial role in helping that address that shortage. However, what's happened is some of the rental housing that could have been made available for longer-term residents are being reallocated and removed effectively from the market for short-term rentals. That means residents are having less options and choices when it comes to rental accommodation. At the same time, thinking about the workforce housing, short-term rentals are also providing a need for contract and seasonal workers or relocating workers. So we heard from industry stakeholders as well as those who provide short-term rentals that the workers and workforce actually utilize short-term rentals as well. So looking to consider the balances of the need of the long-term versus the short-term in the Cowichan region. Some further evidence to the demand of short-term rentals comes from the online accommodation platform revenue data, which saw the accommodation platform tax generate over $170,000 in revenue in 2022. And we can see from the graph since 2019 that this is a substantial increase in revenue. So it's one indication of the demand for short-term rentals. This data here is looking at the number of Airbnb and HomeAway listings in the Cowichan region. That green line indicates the number of entire houses that were listed on Airbnb from 2016 to 2023. And again, we can see the trend moving upwards over time. This map shows us where the concentration of the short-term rentals are located throughout the Cowichan region. So we can see a cluster in Lake Cowichan and Shawnigan Lake. So this is also telling us more information about where long-term rental availability might be squeezed throughout the region, given the number of listings at any given time. So when we shared short-term rental regulations options and asking stakeholders for their input, what we heard is that regulations could be an opportunity to help with a number of things, particularly of maintenance and ensuring good condition and good working order of these short-term accommodations. We also heard that the regulations may be difficult to enforce and that implementing these regulations will definitely require resources and funding. We also heard that, doing a blanket regulations across everywhere might actually unintentionally create issues. So do need to factor in those nuances either by location or even the types of homes that, I don't think somebody would rent this long term. It might be more suitable for short term. So really considering those differences. Some other suggestions provided to us were, maybe the local government can have a government-operated platform to regulate short-term rentals, possibly some tourism-specific zoning where STRs are permitted. There's also a suggestion of perhaps creating some permissive tax exemptions to attract more hotels and bed and breakfasts to help augment those short-term rentals, recognizing that there's a shortfall there. And also looking at temporary use permits as something that could be helpful as well. So where we're going in terms of strategy direction is to implement and suggest implementing short-term rental regulation to regain control over the use of rental properties. And this can look like regional level regulatory changes. So we're considering business license requirements and regulating occupancy, parking, property, and management. We want to strike a fair balance and not make it too onerous because, again, short-term rentals are actually quite helpful for the workforce. And also looking to make sure that there is a monitoring and enforcement component. Okay, moving on to the next one. Next strategy is housing authority. So a little bit of context here. One theme that we have heard throughout this process is that there is a need and desire for an increase in capacity and resources to address workforce housing in the Cowichan. And this is from a number of different ways. Like we've heard a need for increased capacity at the local government level. So that means processing applications to responding to funding calls and being able to partner when opportunities arise. We also heard about capacity to increase in the private sector builders and developers, recognizing we have a shortfall in the number of units being delivered, and also a need for diverse types in housing that might require different skills and trades and construction techniques in order to do it. And also a desire for an increase in capacity in the nonprofit sector, recognizing that there's a growing need and emerging social issues in the region, particularly since the pandemic, where we're seeing a lot more people in need of services and programs. So capacity is and the need for capacity and resources is quite widespread. So we've been exploring opportunities to scale up the region and expand capacity with the objective to address the resource constraints. And one of those potential strategies is establishing a housing authority. So a housing authority is an independent government-owned agency, and it can provide housing services, funding, and programs to house people in a region. And basically, its key differentiating factor from other types of organizations is that it is being led and influenced and directed by a local government. And so it is quite aligned with local government initiatives, and it can also provide an opportunity for the local government to have a channel or a vehicle to deliver housing, either through partnerships or other mechanisms, and also help to manage the inventory, such as taking responsibility over things like housing agreements. So in this consideration, we've been looking at other models from nearby. So we looked at the Whistler Housing Authority, the Capital Region Housing Corporation, the Tofino Housing Corporation, looking at structure and governance and what are they able to achieve and yield and what does it really take to get this done. So we pulled from these as examples and shared that with stakeholders to get some feedback and to see, hey, could this work in the Cowichan region? One of the things that has surfaced is recognizing that the Cowichan Housing Association is already an established organization in the region with a good reputation, and it may be worth considering elevating and empowering the CHA to evolve into an authority corporation to give it more tools and more services for the region. Instead of possibly creating a new entity that would unintentionally create competition maybe or confusion in the region. One of the questions we have is the Cowichan large enough to sustain two different entities? So that's one thing that we've been looking into, and we shared this as an idea with stakeholders, and we've also been engaging with the CHA board on their thoughts around this as well. So what we heard from engagement is a lot of curiosity and cautious enthusiasm over an authority, particularly the benefit of having the local government connected to the authority, which could generate some confidence and certainty with things like the approvals process, and also the potential to attract investment from senior levels of government. That's a key lesson learned from other housing authorities, that they tend to attract a lot of investment once they're well established. We also heard that this could help with connecting with partners to access land, potentially even partner with First Nations as another positive potential. And again, there's some concerns that were raised around potential confusion or competition if there's other housing players, and also the process of getting something off the ground could be maybe long and possibly politically complex. And there is some truth to that as well. You know, creating a new entity or evolving an entity is really a long-term solution. So something like this is really looking something that can be sustained for a number of years in the future, but needs to be supported by other solutions that can be implemented immediately. There was a lot of discussion around funding sources and the mandate. I'm happy to dive into that a little bit more if you would like. Just being mindful of time, I'll continue moving forward. So in our strategy, our direction here is not necessarily recommending the exact approach to adopting this. It's really outlining 3 options for consideration and what the high-level cost-benefit analysis could be. And so these include option 1, we could establish an authority, and we also have CHA continuing doing business as usual, and ideally there's some synergies there. Option 2 is to empower CHA and it can evolve and become a housing authority. Or option 3 is where we decide, you know, an authority actually doesn't make sense for the Cowichan region. We'll put that to the side and find ways for CHA to continue under its current structure and maybe enhance it with potential collaboration to give it a few more tools than is available to it right now. So moving on to accelerated housing solutions. With Accelerated Housing Solutions, this has been brought about recognizing that a typical workforce housing project can take 3 to 4 years to deliver. So we're thinking, how can we get housing product to the market faster to deal with the acute situation that is happening right now? So as part of this strategy, we looked at exploring 6 potential solutions, almost like a package of tools under Accelerated Housing Solutions. So this includes temporary use permits that can allow accommodations such as RVs or maybe small trailers. We looked at extended stay hotels, modular housing construction, adaptive reuse. So adaptive reuse is looking at existing facilities or buildings in a region that could, maybe with some minor renovation, turnkey, could turn into accommodation. And then we also looked at accessory dwelling units, both in terms of extending the permitting use, but also looking at pre-approved designs. So we shared this in workshops with stakeholders. And this is some of the feedback that we received. When it came to temporary use permits to accommodate things like RVs and trailers, we heard quite strongly that, hey, a lot of this already exists. You walk down any sort of rural road or subdivision, we're already seeing this type of accommodation. But what would be a benefit here is we could potentially encourage more health and safety standards for non-conforming housing and also increase housing security. We also got some feedback that that RV models today are much more better designed than years previous and could allow for year-round living and maybe even accommodate families. This is, I'd say, opinion from those that we engaged with. I still think we need to be cautious about livability and choice and making sure housing is suitable for folks. But there's definitely some workforce populations where this could be a suitable temporary option. Some suggestions that were given were things like incentivizing affordability by waiving fees or also creating some specific zoning to support this. Modular construction was enthusiastically received. I think one of the key takeaways was that there are already existing businesses, modular construction businesses in the Cowichan region, who are keenly interested in partnering, perhaps with local government or say even CMHC or BC Housing to develop workforce housing. So there seemed to be some interest and momentum that we could certainly harness here. Some of the challenges that were identified were things like zoning and service land, which is a common theme throughout many of these. Adaptive reuse, so looking at existing buildings and what can be potentially converted into housing. There were many really big and bold ideas that were shared by participants, such as looking at the Cowichan District Hospital. There were a lot of enthusiasm around looking at the waterfront and oceanfront for things like float homes or bringing in even a cruise ship for temporary accommodation, which sounds really big and bold, but it has been done in places like Kitimat, where they had to house construction workers temporarily for resource development. They were throwing the idea here that maybe this could help, say, the construction workers for the hospital. So this is all feedback that we've heard, but we do need to consider scale and the context of the Cowichan region. But I think one of the key takeaways here is that there is an appetite to do some big things in the region. Accessory dwelling units generally were broadly supported, and there was just general concerns about zoning and servicing limitations, and just recognizing that many of the property owners have never undertaken construction or gone through any sort of planning and development, and could require some support by planning staff or some other entity to support them. So our direction here is to outline a suite of options to quickly deliver workforce housing units to the market. And the feedback that we got is that this is supportive, but we need to think about a number of the details here. And lastly, industry-specific guidelines. This is where we're looking at seeing how employers and other organizations can take the lead and initiative on staff accommodation with support from the local government. We zeroed in on industries, if that makes sense for the Cowichan region, that have high job vacancy rates and other initiatives coming online. So healthcare, construction, agriculture, seasonal industries, tourism, and nonprofits. So those are the industries that we are looking at. I'll give one example of an industry-specific guideline. Inspiration taken from Revelstoke, and so we are including case studies in our strategy, and this is one of them. And in this example, the resort is expanding and is going to be bringing in construction workers to the region and need to find a way to house everyone. So the resort applied for a 2-year temporary use permit for a modular construction building to house 64 workers. And the plan is once construction is done, then they're going to repurpose that modular construction building for either additional housing in the community for staff for that resort, or it could also be used for future project crews. So some of the considerations we're extracting from there is how can we pre-zone lands to support temporary workforce housing? How can we have temporary accommodation that can then be converted for legacy accommodation? So that is an example of an industry-specific guidelines that we're trying to inspire. Okay, so wrapping up here with our approach to developing the strategy. In this report, there'll be context and summary of process and those typical sections that you would find in the report. When it comes to the strategy, each one of the strategies will include a detailed description, will include evidence and a business case of why the strategy has been recommended. So that might include things like indicators and data and also qualitative information. 1 to 2 case studies to help us be inspired, a demonstration of how the strategy is in good alignment with local initiatives and senior levels of government, also what the intended desired outcomes are and what the expected impact will be for the Cowichan region, and also implementation, so the timeline, roles, and responsibility to moving that strategy forward. In terms of next steps, we're still wrapping up some one-on-one stakeholder meetings to provide us with additional nuance and context that we're incorporating into our strategies. The first draft of the strategy, we're working on it at this time and expecting to have it done in this month. And then we're going to be sharing this with our stakeholders around the end of August or September with a survey, and also engage with focus groups. We'll also be touching base with our project advisory group on the draft strategy and getting their direct input. And we'll be looking to finalize the strategy in September. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I know there's some details I might have skipped over just respecting time, but happy to dive into any particular component that you're interested in.
Excellent presentation. Thank you for that. Remind everyone this is an information item. I've already got McGonigal, myself, Findlay, Abbott, no, Segal, did I see? No? Okay. Wilson, Douglas. You're going to have a few questions here, Jada.
Okay.
Go to Director McGonigal first.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate that. And we're in a complex situation, no different than we have been historically. If we look back to the end of World War II, for instance, with the returning veterans that were coming back to Canada and the lack of housing at that time, and what was implemented within that is evident within the 100-house subdivision within Lake Cowichan, which was built by the Wartime Housing Authority, to accommodate those returning veterans who would then be looking at the workforce inclusion in that. So it's not a unique situation that we face, but I think that what that points out is that there is a need for multi-government input to accommodate not only the workforce housing shortage, but the attainable shortage throughout Canada, similar to what the Wartime Housing Authority did at that time, which has transitioned into Canada Mortgage and Housing. So just continuing to lobby on that point that that portion could be attained through multi-level government inclusion in that discussion moving forward. I do like the idea of repurposing, for instance, for short-term workforce, and then looking at long-term accommodations for the absence of rental stock within the Cowichan Valley. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. I've got myself, but I'll put myself on the bottom and go to alternate Director Findlay next.
Thanks, Chair. A lot of people around this table might not know my background, but I am a developer by trade, which leads me to have a specific understanding of housing and in this case, workforce housing. I actually had 2 pages of notes and questions here, so I'll try to summarize it really, really short. Okay, so let's just skip over to that one. My view is that going after short-term rental housing is the wrong point. Licensing short-term rentals might be a smart decision, but when it comes to actually trying to get workforce housing, that's the wrong choice. A lot of these houses and apartments and condos are in nice locations, ocean fronts, riverbanks, that sort of thing, and they really don't fit the workforce housing requirement. And really, workforce housing, what we're talking about is affordable housing for workers. So it's really an affordable housing policy is what we're discussing here. So I don't think short-term rentals is the right thing. As well, a lot of these people that have short-term rentals do it because the RTA, the Residential Tenancy Act, is extremely tenant-focused at this point. So when you own a place and you spend a lot of money to buy or renovate a place for rental, and then you're handcuffed when it comes to the tenancies or the rent you're able to achieve or get a tenant out when it's a difficult situation. That's pushed some of these owners into short-term rentals, and for a tourist area like some of our areas here, it is smart, as we said, to have those short-term rentals because we don't have hotels that meet the need. As far as creating a housing authority, I'm 100% against that. My view is that it works in tourist and resource and larger cities like Victoria. Obviously in Whistler and Tofino makes a lot of sense, but a housing authority where it has some control over the development of real estate in our valley, I think we need to get out of the way, let the development community take over and do what's necessary. Do what we do at this board and at the municipality levels and create the zoning and the expedience in getting these properties zoned so that developers can come in and meet the demand with both affordable and market housing. I think is the key, and not to get into the development game in any way. I don't think that's smart. I don't think that's where we should be going, and it's just going to add an extra level of taxation in some way to fund it. And I think our residents across the board are overly taxed at this point. So that's my quick view on that. And one more.
Can I come back to you for
Absolutely.
on the second round?
All right, thank you.
Okay, so I'll put you on the second round. I'll go to Director Wilson next. And just keep in mind, this is an information item only. The staff and consultants will be taking our feedback for additional tweaking of the report, and I'm just noting we have some time pressure here. So, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree. But it's an important topic, this one, so it needs some time to be talked about. The land shortage or availability is a big problem. And we've been working in the south, the outlaw south down there on a certain site. And it's taken years and we've got nowhere. There is always a barrier somehow of obtaining the land that is available there. One of the key phrases, or a couple of key phrases that are in the presentation, is on page 8, surpassing the collective ability to respond. That's a very, very interesting statement, but we have to respond in some way, and how do we do that? I am in agreement with what the previous director said on STR as being the wrong target, because of, again, statements in the presentation which says regulations will be difficult to enforce, requires monitoring and enforcement. We can't even monitor and enforce a lot of the bylaws we have in place already. Now, one of the other statements in there is non-conforming housing already exists in Cowichan. Yes, it does, because there is no other choice. It's being forced upon people. And I speak from the point of view of personal experience, because this is something that I've been trying to help other people with over many, many months. And there is far more non-conforming than any survey will show. It's huge out there. What are we going to do about it? We've got to start making a lot of the land available. We've got to stop people or forcing people to go into non-conforming housing. But if there is no other choice, what are they going to do? And my last point is on the Cowichan Housing Association. And I tend to agree that use the resources and expertise that we already have. But the question I have, and I finally got to it, is option 2. Were the probable costs of doing that, going down that route, investigated? How much would it cost to actually empower the Cowichan Housing Association to become a housing authority? And I tend to agree that, yeah, it might be a way to go if we went down the housing authority route, but how much is it going to cost? Thank you.
Director Douglas.
Couple comments, Mr. Chair. One is with regards to the temporary use permits. There's some references and recommendations in the report with regards to exploring this as a possible tool for workforce housing. And I would just caution that that is a bit of a slippery slope. I think whether the regional district or the municipalities, that this is a tool we use, but once you approve some of these uses through a temporary use permit, I think there is the risk that long-term, there will be a push in some cases to make it permanent. And I just hope that if there are any recommendations with regards to temporary use permits for workforce housing, that it is provided in such a way that it's through the lens of, basic town planning principles like you'd find in the CVRD's harmonized OCP and the municipalities' existing official community plans as well, which tend to try to focus development in existing core areas with services rather than spreading out across the countryside, which has been our generally been our approach to development across North America over the last 50, 60 years. The other point is with regards to accessory dwelling units. We are working on a strategy on ADUs at the municipality of North Cowichan right now, and I know Mr. Reardon, you're in regular contact with the municipal staff, but just want to stress the importance of working together to make sure that those initiatives, or that initiative is aligned with the recommendations of this report. And just finally, I don't want to get into back and forth, but just this notion of there being not enough land, I really have to question that. If you look at our existing core areas in this region, like the whole area surrounding the CVRD office buildings here, it's mostly one-story older buildings that typically if you take a basic approach to town planning, you redevelop these sites. And we're seeing examples of that with the West Urban Development going in nearby, with the new apartment complex going in on Garden Street as well. So in my view, that there is no shortage of land. What we need to focus our efforts on is redeveloping our existing cores where we have services, where we can create these walkable communities and create that density. But going on a bit of a tangent here, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for recognizing that. And I'm just looking at the time and looking at our speakers list. I've got Director Staples, myself, Ishtash, Martman, McClinton, and Toporowski. So Director Staples, please.
My video should start in a second here. Just thank you for putting this together, and I really feel that this is important for how we're going to move forward in opportunities that are coming up with other levels of government. And but again, not necessarily just for workforce housing as has been brought up already. I think it's an important step for just the affordability crisis that we're in and the lack of housing crisis that we're in. And I really look forward to seeing how this moves forward. And I have a lot of other comments and ideas and questions, but feel that they would be better utilized as part of this process, not at this meeting. So just thank you for what you're working on. I look forward to other ways of participating in this and to see the direction that it goes to empower the organizations that already exist, like the Cowichan Housing Association specifically, but also to become a housing authority, possibly, I think is just something that we desperately need and have really learned through the pandemic around working and having committed partnerships with other levels of government. So thank you for the work that you're doing on this.
Thank you, Director Staples. I'm next on the list, and I want to concur with what was said earlier by alternate Director Finley. I'm looking at, I've got a lot of comments on a lot of the things in this report, but the short-term rental, I have grave concerns about that. I don't think it's appropriate as a workforce housing component. I just see the I'm going to call it the greed that is entered into that business model, and there's no way a worker is going to be paying $550 a night to stay in a place 30 minutes from his place of work, and we're seeing absolutely ridiculous numbers in the short-term rental market. The additional concept of having, not, when I say a transient worker, a worker that travels for their employment, staying short-term in communities that are really suffering from the effects of the business of short-term rentals in our communities. They're not adhering to local bylaws, so I'm almost looking at the connection to short-term rentals in this report as being very tenuous. We've got other issues to deal with around short-term rentals, but the impacts that are being felt in our communities as a result of short-term rentals, yes, if they're going to be 30-day rentals that are compliant with our zoning bylaws, that may be a consideration, but that's not what we're seeing. And I think that I personally would like to see a pushback, and that the concept of a short-term rental being something that we could use as a workforce housing tool, it just isn't realistic. The level of greed and cost that short-term rentals are being asked in communities is simply just not on as a workforce housing tool. And so I'd like you to really look at the the efficacy of even contemplating this within this report, because I think it's just missing the mark based on the reality on the ground today.
Point of clarification there.
Please do.
And maybe Jed has something more to add. I think we're looking at the short-term vacation rental market, understanding that it is impacting housing, and that looking at regulations around it we need to look at it to create regulations in order to encourage more of those non-conforming uses that people are using short-term vacation rentals, and shift more of that towards the provision of long-term housing. And then a secondary point is that we see people moving to the region and temporary workers also availing of those short-term rentals in some way, not in the high-end locations, to stay in. And yes, that's more likely in more high-end jobs like a doctor coming here, etc. But there is a place that is taking place also. And then the third part is, we don't have enough hotels, and people are, this is an economic opportunity, and there's things to do with the Residential Tenancy Act, which is making it attractive to do that. So in my mind, the regulations would be, how do we shape that in such a way that we shift that market towards providing more long-term housing, create some nuance to support those instances where it's supporting workers in the region. And if we are going to permit short-term rentals, then do it in such a way that it's in those areas that demand it for tourism and are not suitable for long-term rentals. And ideally that also supports those revenues for that, ideally support the provision of long-term housing as well. So it's trying to have a more nuanced approach. It's not saying, let's have short-term rentals to support the workforce, and so we'll just permit it everywhere. It's how do we look at those regulations thoughtfully, understanding those components, and how do we create regulations that support that? Is that helpful?
Oh, I understand the concept. I'm just suggesting, forget nuance, take out a big stick, that's all. Go on to Director Estesh.
Thank you, Chair. I guess that's the hot topic of everybody's bringing up is the short-term rentals. There is a great place for them, and they are needed, but I think we're our big push. And fortunately, we're going to have maybe be the first to doing some significant stuff. North Cowichan's public engagement surveys currently out, and we're putting this underneath our affordable housing policy, is where we're going to adopt a short-term rental policy, and that will be coming back to council. I think Director Douglas can confirm, I think it's September 6th, I believe. So we'll have some more decision, and we've actually, through our Economic Development Committee, have had the discussion with Mr. Reardon on that, and he's provided more insight in regards to short-term rentals and creating hotels. I would just put that out there as for fellow directors as something to watch for as we go forward and work at the CVRD level. And as well, look at to the work that Tofino did. Tofino did their work back in 2015 because they wanted to get ahead of it. And we're suffering now from not getting ahead of it. There's an absolute place for it. But just to let you know, Tofino charges a business license fee, so they're regulating it and it can occur, but they've just put good regulations with a very big stick, as the chair used as a term. It's $500 for your business license for that first person, and every second person that your short-term rental can provide is another $166 per person, up to a limit of 6 people. So that's a $1,000 a year business license that could go to the CVRD or North Cowichan, Duncan, Ladysmith, that could be put towards our own affordable housing policies or other initiatives that are supporting the community where short-term rentals might not totally be doing it. Equally under that regulation, and it falls underneath the scope of the CVRD and through tourism and a bit through ECDEV Cowichan in there, is that the short-term rentals, because they're not regulated, aren't reporting to the MRDT. If they're here benefiting tourism, well, then they should be a part of supporting tourism if they're benefiting from it. And they're profiting each night and not contributing to the MRDT, which is funding things like the CVRD Sport Tourism Fund and things to that nature. So let's regulate them. On my street, there is, I've lost 3 full homes now. So part of that regulation is, in Tofino's regulation is that you need to be a local resident that owns that property and you must live there. If you have an Airbnb, you cannot rent out your entire house and take a long-term residence that could be a long-term rental or a permanent residence off the market. You need to live on that property, and there's an amount on how many people can be on that property, because if you allow 15 people in a house, then of course then there's not going to be a business case for hotels. So they regulate that, and then their bylaw is very punitive if you don't get a business license to that nature. So I know at UBCM, some of the directors here will be at that, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's a motion, I believe, coming at UBCM on short-term rentals on a provincial regulation that would probably, I think, Mr. Reardon can expand on that. So that's going to give us a big guidance, but I think at least right now we need to get on that regulation side point. Now, they are, on those ones, as I said, on my street, I've lost 3 full houses, and I chat with the visitors that come. The last one, though, across the street, interestingly enough, they rented that one for 7 weeks, but it was 2 employees from the interior that are out, were doing the Crofton Mill turnaround. So they were short-term workers using a Airbnb, but they get per diems, and the cost means nothing because they get per diems to cover that cost. But that Airbnb, or it's not even listed. I don't even know how that one's listed, but just sharing that part of it too, that there was some workforce fill in there. So there's a great place for it, but we need to regulate it and have some costs associated to it. And what we don't regulate, we can't understand or have metrics on.
Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. That was fantastic. A couple points and then a question. For me personally, this is the issue, and I personally get frustrated that some of our other seeming existential concerns trump this. My heart goes out to all the people that can't find a place to sleep, don't have a place to hang their hat, and that goes right down to people that end up living on the streets, to couch surfing, to living in their cars, all of the above. And it frustrates me so much because this is something like this is what we're responsible for doing, and we have I've said many times, we have all the tools to start moving on this. And I would agree. I think it's while regulations could help with the short-term rental market, be careful pointing to that as the boogeyman. So my question for the presenter, sorry, I'm just reading your name here on the screen. Can you put, actually, one more quick comment. I've been doing lots of research on government-supported housing, throughout North America and Europe, and coming around on the issue as somebody that's typically likes to lean on the private sector. It can be a really good counterbalance from what I'm reading. Can you point to any areas locally or regionally where a new housing authority has been put in place and you guys have and seen seen a positive impact. Is there any sort of examples you can shed light on and maybe what that impact was?
Yeah. Well, I'll name a few of them. I know even just recently in the last month or so, the city of Burnaby just announced its own housing authority, and we know that a lot of private developers are quite active in that area. But again, it's meant to complement the private sector nonprofit housing societies development projects with something that is more government controlled. And the Capital Region Housing Corporation and Whistler, of course, are good examples. For Whistler Housing and for Capital Region, both of those have been around for nearly 20 years. So we can reflect on the lessons learned and the benefits and some of the challenges that they've experienced. So, Whistler Housing Authority, for example, they had started off as a nonprofit housing society in the 80s, and they had reached a ceiling to what they were able to do with the tools that were available to them under that kind of structure. And so they had decided, hey, let's actually change this so that we can expand what we're able to do and even start developing some of these units ourselves and getting partnerships. So they had relayed to us as an organization, switching from a nonprofit over to an authority had a number of benefits from a tax perspective, even GST. They've been saving money, on an annual basis. But really, one of the key takeaways for them and even CRHC is that it's still playing the long game. They didn't have the impact in the first 3 years, for example, but now that they are more well established and they have a substantial portfolio, they're able to leverage that portfolio to access more financing, to generate rent revenue off of market units, to now actually support non-market units. So they actually see it as a vehicle to do to support a broad range of housing types. And I think one of the other things in terms of a benefit is sometimes what I've been seeing in other jurisdictions and other clients is that the local government are the facilitators and the regulators and making sure that all the players on the field are playing the game according to the rules. But now what we're starting to see is that, hey, we want to be part of the game. We want to be playing it as well. And I heard that analogy is, I don't think we should step into that arena or play the game. Part of this desire to insert to have a role and to have their own vehicle that they can influence a bit more strongly is recognizing the expectations that senior levels of government are putting on local government. For example, the province is putting requirements to achieve and meet housing targets and are setting that. And local governments are like, well, we've been relying on other sectors to deliver it, but if we're falling short of over 500 units per year, perhaps we need to be a part of this as well and help augment and complement what's being developed, but address that shortfall so we can meet our targets that are actually being placed on us as a requirement. So those are some of the things that I'm hearing as a benefit, is that the local governments can have more control in meeting these targets and to meeting the needs, at the end of the day for the community. So, sorry, that's just top of mind of some of those benefits. I hope that helps.
One quick follow-up, if I may. And I encourage any of my colleagues to just check out, the biggest example in the world is Vienna. They have, I think, nearly 50% is public stock. From the research, preliminary, very basic research I've done, once you sort of hit around that 10 to 15% public housing or through the nonprofit housing, that's when you really start to see rent increases decrease in the market. Am I off on that, or is that sort of something, can you maybe just comment on that?
I mean, Vienna, that's different context for sure. I don't have any data for communities in the BC context when we've hit that amount. So sorry, I don't have something that I can clarify that for you or confirm.
Thank you.
Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair, and to the presenter, thank you for your report. I'm interested in the comments around the table, but my focus is more so on where we're headed with the strategy and your input on a couple of questions. The first one is, will there be any ability to quantitatively show what each strategy or each portion of the strategy could maybe make an impact on? That's the first question.
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, the regional housing needs assessment already outlines projected number of housing units needed in the region, and that's workforce housing, but it also includes other housing like non-market, for example. Ideally, say, if we're looking at accessory dwelling units, we can look at, how many ADUs would we want to see over a certain period of time? Like, what kind of uptake would we like to see? So that can be the desired outcome and impact. I think further analysis, like spatial analysis, geographically, like you want to see it, like how many is actually physically possible. So that can be like an action item to fine tune that number, but we can give a bit of a range. And same with the housing authority. If we're top of mind, if we're falling short of nearly 500 units per year, and we want something like an authority to step in and help address that gap, then perhaps we can set a goal to assign some or all of that shortfall to an authority over a certain time period as well. So that can be one of those ways to tether these strategies with expectations, but also linking it back to housing targets and the estimated housing needs out of the regional housing needs assessment.
A follow-up? Thank you, because from my perspective, I would need to see the linkage to the outcomes. To know that if you're addressing it through short-term rentals, this is a likely impact. If you're going to address it through housing authority, this is likely the impact. But the other piece that I would look for is the time frame as well, whether it's mid, short, long, short, mid, long-term approach. And are you going to lay it out that way as well? So that you can say these things that can happen in the first 6 months, next 12 months, next 5 years, because I guess I'm trying to map out 1,000 units per year over the next years, and then what strategies are going to be impacting them in the first year, the second year, the third year, and so on. So.
Yeah. We're keeping this within a 5-year time frame. Anything beyond that, I don't think would be very helpful, just given how much things are changing and new acute situations seem to be coming into society on an annual basis. So we're keeping within a 5-year. And to answer your question, yes, each strategy, as we're outlining the steps to achieve it and the roles and responsibilities, we're looking at more of that fine tune, what could we do within a year to 2 years. That said, when we have the draft strategy, we do need to soundboard this with local member municipalities and staff as well, because again, one of the challenges we have is capacity and resources. So we have to be mindful of what is realistic that we can achieve within those years, and then harness our energies and efforts possibly to fewer actions that we know we can get done with the resources that are available.
Thank you. Just before we go on to the next speaker, I've just been updated that our lunch will be here in 8 minutes. I'm looking at the remainder of the agenda, and we have a closed session item too. So I'm going to call on everyone. Well, we've had excellent discussion and debate. I'm going to ask for some succinctness in the final speaker's remarks so that we can hopefully get through our agenda before the board meeting starts. So with that, I'll go to Director Toporowski, and I've got Director Findlay to close. Go ahead, Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ms. Bassett and Mr. O'Riordan, for your work on this. Like my fellow director over there said that he had a bunch of questions, I'm going to leave some of these for Mr. O'Riordan for later. But anyways, I was just looking at the remark that stood out was being bold and trying something new and having a unique area as Couch and to work with. And one of the ideas I was thinking of was partnerships and also advocating with the BC government because we're, as I have in my notes here, by a delegation of Mark Sanderson, 20,000 people in our region without a doctor. And looking at being bold, we're getting a new hospital and there's, Bell McKinnon's gonna be built up there, and going towards, you know, builders, and as Director Finley had mentioned about people building things. Looking at rapid housing is another option as well. And again, here being bold, maybe having 100% of those units being for nurses and doctors in one of the buildings that would be built in the area. That would relieve some pressure, and have a minimum of like a 5-year goal for that, and then when those nurses and doctors do find places, because I know when you have those, like with hiring a CAO for Cowichan Tribes, it took him a year to find a house to buy. And with that housing market that was really crazy, being outbid all the time, just having that opportunity for filling those gaps as well. And the province is looking for different options of how to fill these gaps with these problems that we're having. And part of that is, having that option for like the Whistler Village model, maybe combined with this. I noticed there's other ones too, Capital Region Housing Corporation and Tofino. Those were the models that you referred to in your report. It's more of an idea, not a question or anything, but yeah, and also I see in the picture here the model of engaging early and often with Indigenous leadership. Again, I'm saving those for Mr. O'Riordan later, but yeah, those are just some of the things that we need to work through, looking at options. Tiny homes are also another thing. I don't know, tiny homes could be moved. So this could be just a temporary setup or something, maybe partnership with North Cowichan to provide land, hint, hint, Mayor, and bring up these options for housing for our workforce that's going to be moving in this area, because it's going to be a huge hospital, and they're going to have a hard time filling it. And then also opening up to the broader range of our region for people that are looking for jobs here or places and can't find a house for temporary use. I don't know, those are just ideas that I just wanted to throw out there. And also, the Cowichan Housing Association evolving into an authority or a corporation. We've got some models to look at to move towards, so it looks very promising. Thanks.
Thank you. I just want to seek clarification from Director Staples. I think your hand's been up since the last time you spoke. Did you want to speak again?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to take it down.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Director Findlay to close.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of continuing ideas. We need to fast track hotel development in our community, incentivize it, get some hotels built. That's going to take some pressure off short-term rentals, and which will open up some space for workers coming into the valley. ADUs are great, but they're one at a time. And we're going down all these different tracks, and that's obviously one piece of the puzzle, but I don't think we should hang our hats on ADUs. Modular construction is the key here, and I'm not talking about modular like Paddle Road or White Road apartment buildings. I'm talking about individual units that can be built in 5 days when factories are up to speed. I did a development in Estevan in 2014, and that factory can build a house in 5 days. And if we've got serviced and zoned land, comes out the door, on the truck, to the property, installed, and you can have people living in that house within a month. And so I think we need to really, really look at our land in the area to create pre-zoned land, for a modular development. And that's going to be the key to solving our housing issue across the board, workforce and regular market housing. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So there's an information item. I want to thank Jada for the presentation today. I also want to remind everyone that when we get invitations to attend the workshops like the one that was held for this, I found it very informative and was a great resource, and hopefully I didn't dominate too much, but it was fun. With that, I want to thank you very much for your presentation, and I'm sure that you've taken notes and Barry's taken notes, and we look forward to the next version and the next update. Thank you very much. Okay, folks, I might have to do some quick stick handling here. We've got still R4, R5, R6. I think R5 and R6 can go relatively quickly, as can R7, but it's been suggested to me that, oh, where's Director Stone when you want to add stuff to his plate? So, Director Stone, we're thinking of adding R7 to the board agenda, as well as the two closed session items to the board closed session. So we guess we need a motion to that effect, right? Moved and second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Mr. O'Riordan, in regards to the next item, what do you prognosticate as far as length goes?
This is a for information item, so.
So was the last one.
Yeah, essentially, I'll keep this short. Essentially, this report is just coming to you before we go out to RFP process. And so if the board had any major comments on the proposed plan for the economic development Cowichan strategic plan, then I'd welcome it now before we go out to process. And if not, then the report's in front of you and we can leave it there.
Director Stone.
Looks good.
And this is information. No, really, I want to encourage anyone that's read and taken notes and any comments on this particular item. Yeah, we all used up our words in the last one. Director Toporowski?
I'll make it quick, Chair, thank you. Just a comment on the opportunities to partner with First Nations, just wanting to know if you contacted, I believe Jody Dick is still at the Cowichan Tribes Economic Development Corporation? I'm not sure.
Yes, I've been in contact with Jody about opportunities to present to KDC with the proposed scope as well, so they're involved in the process from the beginning. So we're in discussions.
Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, nobody on screen. Thank you, Mr. O'Riordan. Next item.
R5, report from the Legislative Services Division regarding the Accessibility Advisory Committee update. Again, recommendations for information.
And it seemed like this was rolling out. The only concern that I had was we don't have budget for this yet, and it'll be a new requisition amount, will it not? Okay, so everybody gets that. The numbers in the report are new. I'm not going to say it's a download, and go to Director Douglas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we're undertaking similar work at North Cowichan right now. In fact, Alternate Director Finley, who is also Councillor Finley, is chairing our committee that's overseeing this work. We are doing this with existing resources. There is an additional cost for the municipality, and that's not a criticism of the suggested approach here at the CVRD. I'm sure there's reasons why the funding request will be brought forward, but I was going to suggest that perhaps the staff from our respective organizations and perhaps the other municipalities as well could get together just to share the different approaches and see if there's any lessons we can learn from one another, or look at ways to share resources with one another. Again, I don't know if the North Cowichan approach is going to be applicable here at the CVRD, but the fact that we are doing it within existing budgets and resources, if our model might be helpful to CVRD, then it'd be great to compare some notes on that.
I love the suggestions. I note that staff are no doubt taking notes, but also going to note the difference in the fact that when we provide a new service, it has to be delineated as a new service with its independent funding sources and expenditures allocated as a separate individual budget. And that's the fun of the Local Government Act and regional districts. So thank you for that, and I'm sure staff have taken notes. Alternate Director Finley.
I just want to make a quick comment. I am the chair of ours at North Cowichan. It's been fascinating, and the people involved are from all aspects of ability and disability. And so I don't know if there's been a chair or a board member here, or two board members, I guess, attached to that committee, but it is eye-opening. Especially if you don't or aren't involved with anybody that has disabilities or ability challenges. My daughter happens to have it, so it's been even eye-opening for me, and I would recommend participating in that if you have the chance. Thank you.
Director Toporowski.
I just saw Patrick's hand up.
Thank you. I think that concludes. I don't see anyone on screen. I'll go to Ms. Boyd for our 6.
Our 6th report from the General Manager, Community Services Department regarding the regional recreation governance, Cowichan Lake Community Halls. Additional financial information.
You again. Mr. Elzinga, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Succinctly, this has been referred to staff for some additional financial information from the July 12th report. There is the breakdown of the distribution between areas FI in the town to community halls. There's a recommendation in the report.
Ms. Boyd, what recommendation do we have on this report?
Thank you, Chair. We have that it be recommended to the board on July 26, 2023, that a Cowichan Lake Community Hall Advisory Committee be established, that the membership of the Cowichan Lake Community Hall Advisory Committee consists of 2 appointed resident community members for each of the following jurisdictions. That'd be electoral area F of Cowichan Lake Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, as well as electoral area I, U-Boat, Mead Creek, and the town of Lake Cowichan.
Moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Deck. Any discussion on this item? Director McGonigal.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. When the sub-regional entity was implemented for the West Cowichan area, I think it was imperative to see that these community halls remained within that sub-regional entity for diversion of funds towards keeping them open and keeping them heated, et cetera. So it is a great model, a successful model of sub-regional entity, and moving forward, I hope that we can continue within that with community input. Thank you.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. Any further discussion, comment? Motion's on the floor. It's been duly moved and seconded. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. R7 has been moved. Ms. Boyd, what comes after R7?
Thank you, Chair. We have 9 unfinished business, new business, and question period. I don't see anyone in the gallery.
And nobody online.
And closed has been moved to closed board, and I'd be looking to adjourn.
Moved. Seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. We